Hi, everybody. Welcome to this week's film study. I'm Kyle Jones from 11warriors.com. This week, we're going to talk a little bit about the Ohio State defense coming off a big win in Happy Valley over Penn State, a top 5 matchup, a big win for the Buckeyes that's propelled them into the number 2 spot in the initial CFP rankings. Now, on Tuesday, Ryan Day mentioned that they really re-engineered the entire defense coming out of the Oregon game. They had a bye week, came out against Nebraska, looked great, and of course continued that the following week. Didn't give up an offensive touchdown to the Nittany Lions, had a couple big stops. Obviously, a lot of the goal line stuff was certainly just toughness and will along the defensive line. But what they've done structurally and schematically is a big difference from what we saw not just earlier this season, but the first couple of years under Jim Knowles. In year one, it was much more aggressive. There's a lot of blitzing, a lot of man coverage, which was really a holdover from the previous regime defensively. That's what the defense did well. They played a lot of man, so they continue to do so. Of course, they got beat by some big plays. So last year, to eliminate those explosives, they got very conservative, played a really, a conservative cover 4, a lot of zones, kept everything in front of them. And that's largely what we saw earlier in the season, as we'll get into. Now, Day mentioned that he spent a lot of time with the defense, and he looked at it, he brought the perspective of an offensive coach. Obviously, he's a great play caller. We've seen that over, a number of years here. And he helped the defense by saying, hey, if you're going to do this, I would do that, right? And so what we've seen is a lot of changes specifically across the defensive line. The Buckeyes are doing different things up front, which is allowing them to do different things on the back end, which we'll get into today. And of course, that's what Jim Knowles meant when he said, we're able to do things that look more like what he had done at Oklahoma State. We're seeing different ways to fill the run gaps. We're seeing different ways in coverage to defend the pass. And that's really paid big dividends for the Buckeyes in the last 2 weeks. So let's dig in. All right, let's start by talking about what Ohio State's base defense was at the beginning of the season, which really was, a cover 4 traditional zone look, in the sense that it was really 7 defenders dropping 4 deep, 3 underneath, keeping everything in front of them, keeping eyes on the quarterback, more of like a spot drop zone than you see like some of the stuff that you hear people talking about with the Saban tree, which is more man match, which we'll get into a little bit later. This is truly a zone. And what does that look like when we manifest? You can see that there's these 4 guys, in the secondary. There's two deep safeties. The corners, it's unclear what they're doing. But as the play develops, and you can kind of see, look, we've got 4 deep defenders. That's our 4 DBs. We've got our 3 linebackers underneath, right? Obviously, one of the time, that's Jordan Hancock most of the time when they're in a nickel look. But really what they're doing is they're saying, this linebacker's got the outside, this linebacker's got the outside, you've got the middle. And then we've got our 4 deep defenders who keep everything in front of them. They distribute the routes, and you'll see in this snap, right, we get a post route where, this safety's coming this way, so Caleb Downs follows, and they're able to play, and this guy stays deep, so Igbenogson stays with him. It's a really conservative, keep the lid on type defense, which is really helpful when you're trying to eliminate explosive plays. And that's what Ohio State's done a fairly good job of, with the exception of the Oregon game. Obviously, as you can see with Igbenogson here, that turns into one-on-one coverage the deeper you get downfield, and that's really what Oregon was able to win against Denzel Burke a couple times. But really, this is a very conservative shell, because the only weak spots on this field are these flats over here, right? That's a lot of ground to cover for the outside linebackers, or whoever that flat player is. But you're really covering up the rest of the field pretty well. Meanwhile, we've got our 4 rushers, our ends have the outside, and you've got 2 other defenders in interior. But it's really a 4 deep, 3 under base coverage. Guys keep their eyes on the quarterback. They're able to distribute and handle deep concepts, with really the only weak spots being the flat. So the challenge with any type of defense is, once the offense knows what to expect, if you run it too often, it becomes your calling card. Then they're able to identify whatever those weaknesses are. And as we just identified, those weak spots are these flat areas, right? Because these linebackers, they've got to go a long way. In this case, of course, Hancock to the bottom of the screen here. The issue is that those players also typically, especially the linebacker, has a run responsibility. In this case, it's that weak side B gap, right? It is in between the nose tackle and the defensive end. It's between the guard and the tackle. And we'll see that Akron, right in the very first possession of the season, goes right after this weak spot. Joe Moorhead knew exactly how to attack it. It's what Ohio State had done for the entire last season. They showed it in the spring game, and he went right at that weakness. It was the only chance that his team had. And as we can see from this concept, it's a bit of an RPO, right? There's a handoff where the quarterback's reading, and we've got this motion out from the backfield. The back's just releasing here. The receiver is going to clear out, and the reason for that is because Ohio State's in that 4 deep. You can see their 4, right? They're 4 deep defenders, 3 underneath, right? That corner, he's expected to follow that deep receiver, that number 1, right? Number 2 in this case would be now the running back, and number 2 is handled by the inside player, but that's a long way for Lathan Ransom to go. And also, he's not supposed to fill straight forward. His job, of course, is to drop back, right? So this becomes CJ Hicks as the weak side linebacker. You've got to go out and match because you have the flat. Of course, the problem, as CJ Hicks sees right now, is there's also a potential handoff right here, right? So watch what happens as the play goes on. Quarterback pulls, just dumps it out to the flat. They get a good gain. When we flip over to the end zone view, what you can see is this is really happening in real time, what's going on here with the linebacker, right? We get this looping block, and that's not really important. The center's going to loop around here. The issue is really what's happening with CJ Hicks because, right, we got this running back out in the flat, and he knows I've got to bust my tail to get over there, but also, hey, wait a minute, this gap is mine, and I've got to fill that run gap because if this running back takes the handoff, that's my hole to fill, right? Styles can't get all the way over there from the other weak side position. So it really, again, puts this weak side, that flat player, and the underneath coverage in a ton of conflict. And teams have been taking advantage of that against Ohio State now for almost a year and a half. Now, as anybody who watches football regularly knows, third down is a different animal. A lot of coaches will think of it as a completely different game plan. And Ohio State has played a lot of man coverage this season, especially early in the year in these situations. And you would say, hey, they've got a great defensive back room. The DBs might be the strength of this team ultimately. A bunch of corners who should be playing on Sundays. Let's use those guys in their best situation. Nobody's going to have to worry about run fits. So let's man up. And so you can see, against Michigan State here, they basically come out and declare on this 3rd and long, we're in man. Now, the corners, they're a little bit in off coverage, so maybe they're not. But the giveaway is where Igbinosin is here. He's lined up in the interior. This is a cornerback lined up on the interior across from a receiver. This is man coverage. Hancock's lined up from across from a guy. Okay, that's a dead giveaway. Now, the question, of course, is what's happening up front. We'll get 5 guys rushing. Caleb Downs is going to come down and play like a spy on Aiden Childs. He's a good athlete. But the key, of course, is the man coverage here. And Michigan State knows that, and they're able to take advantage of it with just a simple man beater. It's like a pick play, basically, right over the middle, just crossing route, tons of open space behind the pressure, gets a first down. Watch what happens here again. All we get is just a level passing route. So, this guy's going to come up and run almost like a glance, like a post almost, and then right behind it, this little receiver is going to come underneath, and that's going to just set a pick for Jordan Hancock, right? That means because they're in man, they've got man-to-man coverage. They don't know who else they're supposed to get. They're not looking at anybody else. They're just trying to follow their guy. That tight end comes out and sets a pick on Hancock, allows the receiver plenty of open space. There's nobody else helping. Downs is watching the quarterback. He's watching here. He's watching here. The only person that might help is this free safety that's 30 yards downfield, right? And so all this is to say that Ohio State was just getting predictable. It's not that man coverage or quarters is bad. They can all be helpful. They can all work in certain situations, but they are lacking disguise. It was obvious to see what was happening out there. Now, as we discussed a few weeks ago, Oregon really did a great job manipulating what Ohio State was trying to do defensively. The big, changeup that the Buckeyes brought to that game was playing a lot more man on early downs, but the Ducks sniffed it out, right? You saw a lot of action like this where we get, a slot receiver, from a funky formation lined up in the backfield, motioning or running away from the run play, which drags the guy who's got him in man coverage, in this case, Jordan Hancock, away from the run play, which is just going to hit through that B gap that actually, as we'll see in a second, Hancock's supposed to fill. So, they both leave, gap opens up, James, leaks out for a big gain, and Oregon just did a great job, as we discussed, of manipulating this. Now, the issue here is not just that Ohio State ran man or zone. It's not about the coverage. It's about what they were doing with the front, which was so predictable, and this was happening throughout every game. And the reason that's important is what your defensive front is doing affects what your coverage does, because all three levels have to fill the run. So what Ohio State has continuously done under Larry Johnson is they've played this kind of cage mentality where your ends rush straight up field, and that's worked a ton when you've got great pass rushers, great athletes that can beat the tackles athletically. And then you've got the nose tackle. In this case, he jumps over a gap. But then your middle linebacker, he's got the other A gap. We get the will linebacker who has the C gap. Well, that means that Jordan Hancock, the guy who's going to get motioned across, right, he's still got to fill this B gap. And he's putting conflict. And because your tackles and because your ends are presenting this picture where they're just coming straight up field, to see how wide they're lined up, that's telling the offense, hey, one of these interior gaps is going to get messed up. Let's move one of those interior offensive players. We saw Akron do it with the RPO. Oregon does it in this case just with motion, very simply, and that's what's going to allow it. And so when we talk about some of the changes that Ohio State's making structurally, a lot of it is dependent on what the defensive line is doing. How can they change up what they were doing to allow the rest of the entire 11 players present a different picture pre-snap versus what they do post-snap? So since Ryan Day started spending more time in the defensive meeting room, and we've seen some changes coming to what Ohio State's doing defensively, one of the big changes is the way that they've incorporated Caleb Downs into the run fits a little bit more, really employing the three safety system that Jim Knowles was kind of brought in to run. It's what he ran a lot at Oklahoma State. It's what he talked about this week of saying, we're doing more of those things. And what you can see is we got our two deep safeties here, but that's Jordan Hancock, who again was a corner, playing deeper now, and that allows our corners to be pressed up, and that means that Caleb Downs here is really this special player. He's kind of this unblocked. It's the second and a half level right behind those linebackers, right? And what we're going to see is instead of the defensive ends kind of closing and creating the box, you're going to see these corners that are pressed up. It's really their job to kind of create that box we talked about, right? Nothing gets outside of them. And that's what we're going to see on this play, because sure, you might say the corners, if they're pressed up, they can't cover deep. Well, if these receivers run deep, luckily you've got these safeties that are playing with such depth that they're able to get over the top. And that's really what they're banking on. It's a cover two. It's a Tampa 2 scheme, right? We've got two deep, short, 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 short. And this is our pull runner, who's really the most important player, right? And that's the best player on the defense, Caleb Downs. And as we see what happens here, you're going to see Downs kind of just chase down this running back from his spot in the middle. And I want to show again really quickly, look at Denzel Burke, right? He's keeping this edge. He's going to keep the blocker, the lead blocker, from pushing him out. He forces the back ultimately to turn back in right towards his oncoming teammate. This is what we call you've got a contained player here. But, the way that Ohio State's playing is before, where you had your defensive ends. Like, look at how wide Jack Sawyer is. Imagine him coming upfield. Well, now look at how narrow the other defensive end, JT Tuimoloau, is. Normally, he'd be out here, right? And those are your contained players, trying to contain everything in the middle. Now, he's much more pinched in. He's in, on the inside shoulder of the tight end. And he's going to pinch down. Obviously, this tackle's got the nose gap, or the A gap. But you're going to see the 3 technique. He's going to pinch down. You're going to see JT actually pinch down. And again, that's because if JT's pinching down, this guy's pinching down, you've still got that corner who's able to set contain. And all of that is done. Again, JT's going to come across because you've got this linebacker, and that's your Mike, Cody Simon, who's really got now the outside. The whole goal, of course, is what we call spill and kill, which is we're going to pinch the inside, we're going to spill the ball out, and then we're going to have guys, which in this case are Downs and Sonny Styles, who are running free. You're not getting defenders up to blockers up to the second level to block them. They're able to run free and chase down the running back, right? Neither of those guys, Styles or Downs, gets touched, right? It just becomes a foot race between the two best athletes on the field and the running back. And of course, the two best athletes on the field are able to get there and make a play. So different from what we've seen in the past from Ohio State. They have run this in years past. They've run it this season. We saw it against Michigan State some, but they're definitely running it a lot more often and finding ways to get in it. Now, one of the other things that Ohio State's been much better with over the last couple of weeks, and Ryan Day spoke about how as an offensive coach, the way that he would have looked at the way Ohio State was lining up, is they become far less predictable with the picture that they show pre-snap versus what they're running post-snap. Now, again, we showed the example against Oregon where, they brought the corner over and that was a clear signal of man coverage. We see this again against Nebraska in the first game, right? We've got a corner pressed up here. We've got Davis and Igbinosa in the corner lined up to the Twins side, right? There's two tight ends up to the top. So we've got Sonny Styles, our strong side linebacker. We got our Mike, our Will. We've got our two deep safeties. I mean, despite what the safeties are doing and showing too high, this sure looks to the offense based off of what Ohio State does. They're going to run man coverage. Why? Because, again, we've got those two corners to the Twins receivers. They're manning up. They're putting like on like. They want to have their linebacker on the tight end and their cornerback on the wide receiver. That's what the quarterback sees pre-snap. But as the ball is snapped, that is not at all what we get. We actually get a straight cover two, right? We still got our two deep safeties. We've got, Denzel Burke drops to the flat. But now Sonny Styles is playing the flat the way that a corner normally would. And Igbinosin is playing, the hook drop the way that a linebacker always would. So they're essentially showing one picture pre-snap, and then they're dropping into something different. Again, this is Tampa 2, so we've got, in this case, Arvell Reese is our pull runner. He's that a little bit deeper dropper. And now the result of the play is just it's a messed up screen pass because, Nebraska just doesn't execute. But even if they had, imagine this guy catches the ball, we've got two defenders here that are just ready to close. Burke's already beaten his man. Igbinosin's going to get around the defender. And it's really just less about, they blew up a screen pass with this. That's not the important part. The important part is Ohio State showing one look pre-snap and employing something very different post. And that's a big difference from what we've seen from them over the last couple of years. All right, another great way that we're seeing Ohio State mask things is they're showing the same look. Again, this is a third down look. I mentioned things get a little bit different and a little bit hairier in these situations, but they're being very thoughtful and aggressive about how do we show one picture and do something different to really try to confuse the opponent, right? So what we can see in both situations is there's nobody deep in these third and long situations, these clear passing situations. There's no deep safeties. We can see that there's corners pressed up close, right? We get a close man-to-man here, close man-to-man. We're seeing pressed up corners. There's no deep safeties. This says this is going to be a blitz. They're running a zero blitz, meaning there's zero deep defenders. They're pressing it. They're rushing the quarterback. They're going to send more than four, even though we're only seeing four down linemen. Even on the left side here against Nebraska, Sawyer standing up, but you don't really see necessarily who's all coming, right? And what ends up happening in both situations, or let's watch against Nebraska the week before. They get a little bit of motion here, and then they suddenly drop out, right? They actually drop into a cover three where we get. The safety is going to bail. We get the corners bailing. We get this guy's bailing. And then they're going to distribute into a 3 deep 4 under look. And so they're showing a pressed up look, but they're actually going to play zone, right? And that's confusing enough to Raiola. He drops back, doesn't like what he sees. He doesn't know what he's seeing. There's not a ton of pressure, there's a little bit. And sure, he scrambles for the first down because, it's third and long and there's four rushers and 6 different rush lanes he could run through. Obviously, fans are going to get frustrated, but on third and long, a quarterback taking off to run, you're going to take that 10 out of 10 times, unless it's Lamar Jackson, basically, right? So Ohio State shows that 1 week. Again, they press everybody up, and then they bail out into a zone look. The next week, they're in the same look, similar situation, third and long, and what happens? Well, in this time, they're pressing up. Penn State looks to the sideline. They're expecting the same thing. And we actually get that blitz, right? But they're now rushing in what we would look at as just a cover one situation. We get this blitzer here straight up the middle. We've got man coverage across the board. And really all that's happening is that, Cody Simons, he's just keeping an eye. We've got Caleb Downs keeping an eye. They're just playing a short zone. This is man coverage all the way. And, it's just a totally different look that's coming from the defense. Aller freaks out, just throws up a prayer by the time the pressure gets there, right? You can see that unblocked middle linebacker coming for him, just throws up a prayer. Igbinosun's there, makes the play. So, again, two similar situations, two similar looks pre-snap, two totally different outcomes post-snap. All right, so our last clip comes from this past weekend against Penn State. Some people might not like hearing this. Some people might love it because of the results that it brought. But one thing that we're seeing is Ohio State's clearly taken a page out of the Michigan playbook from last year. Again, because you're doing different things up front, you're able to just expand what your playbook has in it, right? And now an example of that we see here, this is a second down, 2nd and 8, fairly normal situation here. Ohio State's lined up in that same base look. It looks like that 4 deep quarters, cover 4, right? 4 deep, 3 under zone. Very similar, simple alignment. But what actually happens pre-snap is very different. They're going to run something we call 2 steal, which is a blitz where, we've got our lineman, this is our D end out here. Looks like he's crashing from the outside. They're going to box the run as we saw, right? This guy's going to have the B gap. He's going to have blah, blah, blah. Looks very similar, right? But it's actually going to be a pressure. It's a 5-man pressure that's coming. Now, the first thing you'll notice, we get Caden Curry dropping into the flat here from his defensive end position. Jack Sawyer's going to rush. And then we're going to see Jordan Hancock blitzing from that nickel spot, right? Behind it, what we actually have is it's 2 steal because they're stealing a defender, right? There's only 6 players that are dropping into coverage, 5 are rushing, but they're going to employ Tampa 2 coverage, and that's a 2 deep, 5 under. But wait, there's only 6 guys. How are you going to do it? Well, to the wide side of the field where there's more room to cover, we're going to play normal cover 2, where we get Caleb Downs dropping into the back. This corner's going to press up, right? We're going to see Sonny Styles drop over into that hook zone. So you've got 3 over 2 to the field. And then what we're going to have is Lathan Ransom is essentially the pull runner now. And then backside, Igbinosun's going to drop, and he's going to be the other deep half, right? So your corner's playing what we'd call an invert. So your corner's playing deep and your safety's playing under. But that's really what you're doing because, you can see Curry's underneath to the bottom of the screen. You've got a deep defender in Igbinosun. And then what we're going to see behind it is you're showing, wait a second, where's the other linebacker? As Hancock blitzes, then behind him, we're going to have Cody Simon blitz, and that's where the pressure is going to come, right? We're going to see those 2 come in. That's where we actually end up getting the sack, right? We watch from the back end. You can see Caden Curry drop out. We see McDonald blitz this way. We see Sawyer blitz this way. Houston, the tackles rush over, and then we get that pressure through the B gap, right? 77, the left guard, he's looking, he says, great, now I see it. I see this guy coming on. And then right behind it, we actually get the pressure that gets a sack. But all of that is done because Aller's got to sit there and hold it, right? He's scanning the field. Maybe I can throw it. Wait, nothing's there because I see pressure. I must be able to dump it off to my running back in the flat. But again, because you peeled off this defensive end, right? We get the check down that Aller tries to throw to at the last second, but the defensive end is there, right? You're able to cover and take away all of that. And again, now you've got this great coverage system here. When Ransom doesn't see anything coming to the other side, he then, is able to lock up. It turns into almost like man coverage, even though Igbinosun's got the deep half. Again, you're just doing more here, and that's the exciting part. If you're an Ohio State fan, you're seeing the coverage concepts expand. You're seeing the playbook expand, but they're not changing the picture pre-snap, right? They're not dictating, they're not, showing the offense their hand before, too early. They're allowing the offense to think one thing is happening or not have a clear picture and then be able to do multiple things behind it once the ball is in play. And that's the big difference. That's what we see when we're hearing about what did Jim Knowles do at Oklahoma State? What is he doing now at Ohio State? It's really that kind of, that kind of hidden nature of the defense, really kind of just keep the offense offhand. And really he's able to then dictate what's happening throughout the course of the game.